Hello everyone, my name's Butch, and I like to make ball jointed dolls. Today's video will give you a sneak peek on the process I use to make these dolls quickly. Most dolls that I build are finished within about 40 to 50 hours. Now that's a fast ball joint doll, even if it is only 5 3/4 inches tall. I personally, when I start making my figures, like to begin with the beads. I use molds when I make them, just because there'll be 24 of them and it's a huge time saver. I also like to build things like the hands and the skull at the same time. After the beads and the knees are made, I like to go into making the waist. The torso actually will dictate the scale of the body, how tall it's going to be, how girthy you might want to make your appendages. After the waist, I'm into the upper torso. Yeah, let's keep this PG, so we'll keep handling down to a minimum. I like to do layers upon layers. I start with a core, and I'll put a layer on top of that to get closer to shape, and then I'll put a finishing shape on. That's what I love about polymer clay. You can bake in, work, put more, bake on. Every time I'm adding, this is what's called bake and bond. I like using the Sculpey products. When you put the clay fresh to bake, fresh to fresh, I like to use this because it's almost like a glue. I find if you set this aside for a few minutes, then come back, which is something you don't see in the video, it really sticks the piece to it. Now here the chest will have a strap that goes across it, and I want it to look like it's eaten in, so we're just going to indent it a little bit. I wish I would have done this technique when I did the thighs. You'll see that when it comes up. You'll notice I've wrapped my beads in aluminum foil. That's so that they don't stick, but I like finding that using that bead in that socket when you make it makes it rotate and sit properly. When I did the jacket, instead of hiding the seams, I cut the pieces so that they all fitted together where the seams would be. My favorite shirts on the Attack on Titans is the collar within the jacket. I don't like the crew necks, don't like the sweaters. I like that collar on collar. One thing I love about handling the pieces on the bars is you don't get much for fingerprints. This process doesn't have to be just for a 6-inch doll. It can work. I've done it for a 9-inch doll, and there's no reason it couldn't work for a 12-inch doll. Here's where I wish I would have indented those straps. But you can see that I used like a tube. That's just a polymer clay tube. And it acts as a spacer so that my legs will be the same thigh length, the same shin length, so that my body parts and proportions stay what I want, and the beads don't push when I'm thickening parts up. You'll see in the wrapped joint beads that I've made this little bit of like a flag up. That's where the double beads would actually bend, so it lets me know where I got to dimple in a bit. Hands, this is actually one piece folded over that pin, smushed down, and then fingers cut out. If you're more interested in how I do most of this doll, in my playlist you'll find a full version of this doll tutorial. Here I'm just making the boots on a pre-baked shin already, smoothing everything out. But baking the parts on the bar, like making the parts like I do, everything stays in line. Everything I do is simple on simple on simple, so that you have so much simple that it looks impressive. With the arms, the legs, the torso finished, now I go into the thing that I'm just learning, heads and faces. I like to work on a skull. So far that's helped me fine-tune how I sculpt a face without having to worry about what my base core is like. I use a little mold to bake eyes in, and the mold has little dimples in it for putting colored irises. After they're baked in, I can go back in add a little bit of translucent to shape the facial features. I think I really need to start doing the lips while I'm forming the jaw. I love doing the hair. Most of my dolls have multiple sets of hair. You'll find a lot of the female characters I do will have ponytails. And it's not because I can't do the long wisping hair in different styles. It's because I find the ponytail gives a head the most amount of movement. And my dolls are all about the movement. Usually my dolls will have a couple sets of hair, but this doll is only going to have this one set. This character has a belt that accepts ODM gear, which means I need to leave passages for these hooks and loops to flip down into. Now a paper towel is 2-ply, so if you cut a little strip and put it in between, it'll act like a little space. We'll trim up the paper towel, and when we do our painting, I like to start with a wash. A colored wash will disintegrate that paper and just leave the tube in between. A lot of times the washes will be close to its original color, just so that the paint will be able to glide over the surface instead of being soaked up randomly by the polymer clay. Here we're applying some of that wash to that skirt. Into the other parts, I start with the lightest, go to the darkest, then I start painting. I'm new to the painting thing, so But I found the washes have really increased how everything looks. I've liked the depth that's added to everything. And how it shows the cracks that show in pieces. That's okay, because she only has one head of hair, so it's going to get glued on anyways. A little dry brushing on some edges. Bring out some things, make things look worn. Some little bits of paint. Just separate stuff, make this belt pop so that you actually see those nice belt loops I put on. A little black over the brown. And I don't have a small enough paintbrush, so I had to do this with a toothpick. I don't have a lot of money in paints and brushes yet, so I raided what I could from the daughters. Didn't turn out too bad. Now, we get into a lot of drilling. I'll end up with a whole day of drilling. I'm not going to fool you. I always start with the smallest drill bit, and then I'll work up. If you try to push a big drill bit through right off the hop, you're going to snap all that work. And I found that if you go up from a small bit and go up in small increments, you can actually drill a big hole and leave very little material left over. Even during the drill and fit, I rarely have to do any trimming, almost no sanding. Right here I'm drilling where the peg will go into the boot. This is my second favorite way to secure the elastic. This figure's head, I'm just gluing a loop down into the neck hole so that when I do the elasticking, I have something to loop the elastic through to go down to the legs for tension. This is how I do my fingers. This is my favorite way to do a joint. It can also do feet with toes very easily. And because this hair had a crack, I had to glue it onto her skull just to make sure the crack didn't further expand. But the range of motion on this figure is quite good. Especially when you consider I have trimmed and sanded nothing. This is straight from sculpting on the bar to drilling out and being strung onto an elastic. The criteria I have for my dolls is they have to be able to stand up on their own. They have to be able to hold positions long and strong enough so that I can do stop animation with it. And their hands have to grip things well enough that they can hold onto those items while I'm doing stop motion with the figure. Now let's make some accessories for this girl. Here we're going to start off with making the square for her ODM reels to hang off of. This is the base for everything. Eventually this little metal peg I have that I've wound up and flattened, I'll be bending it down to act as a hook to go in the middle lower back belt space. I'll add a bunch of little doohickeys and doodads. Originally I was going to have the cables come from this to her containers that sat on top of her scabbards and to the swords themselves. But when I tried it, they got tangled up pretty quickly. Oh, this is the most satisfying. This is like popping bubbles for polymer clay. Here I'm making some burgers, and like all great artists, I have to at least let you see the back of my hand once for a long time and block everything out. So we'll just put the rest parts there. With some bacon bond, we'll add some little details to the covers for the reels. And I'll stick them on, and then I'll set them aside, and I'll let them just sit like that for 15-20 minutes, and I'll give them a roll. When I stick them on, I gotta drop it so that, you know, it looks like she's crashed into something. The funny thing about this little detail here is once I poked all those little holes in, yeah, I had to shave that on an angle so that she could get some really good arching. Now to get those web shooters looking good, I had to make sure that it had some end pieces to look like cables would come out. Now you can see those other loops that I've twisted to go down through the belts. Those will be to hold her scabbards. We'll do a whole bunch of painting on this. A lot of dry brushing just to bring out some bits and pieces. A little bit of washes here and there to unify. Now, you can bake cardboard in your oven. You don't have to worry. Cardboard can actually take up to almost 400 degrees temperature. It does not instantaneously combust. It needs a flame. So feel free to wrap it in polymer clay and stick it in your oven. I do it all the time, and I find with a little coat of bacon bond, I let it sit and get tacky before I wrap it. It works great, and it keeps big bulky pieces down light without having to use a whole bunch of aluminum foil. Which, let's face it, you can't always get smooth, and when you want something smooth and don't want to have to do a lot of sanding, it means you have to start with something smooth. Here I have some other little metal bits from when I made the sword. It's blade steel, so I just cut these extra little pieces out. It was going to be too much work to have all the blades slide in and out. Not really, but I got lazy. Let's be honest. And I just wanted it to look like it would. Honestly, it was because it was too much work to make the sword have the blades come in and out. Make a couple little cylinders to go on top. Round it out. Little doodad. That's where eventually that line was supposed to go in. We'll make a little tap set on top. It's a little wire bent over a polymer clay tube. These little wires, I bent them so they wrap around the case. Originally, there was going to be hanging cables to help support them, but they were one of the things everything started getting tangled up in. The front one is actually the hook to hang off that loop that goes through the belt. Cut away some of the polymer clay on top. Unfortunately, I don't like to keep that little bit that has a little glue already mixed in with it. I end up throwing those little chunks away. I washed the case and I didn't like it, so now I had to paint it back over again. But with the dry brushing over that washed case, I actually liked that effect. So I'm definitely going to paint more. Here's those little steel blades I cut for the swords. I'm just wrapping some wire around to make it look like it's got the little trigger guard. Then I'll wrap that other piece of wire around so it'll look like that little caliper that they have that looks like a bicycle's brake. Put a little blob at top just to hold everything in place. And then I wrapped a needle. That was going to be where that thread was going to go down in when I wrapped it with the brown for the handle. Throw in some details, make sure that passageway is open. Took all that time to bend the wire. I'm going to make the grippy cable things. They're like a brake cylinder, and they have these little bumps at the ends that I wanted to make sure were in. I do try to make everything as close to what I can. I don't go crazy for realism, but you know, most of the details need to be there. Having this needle in the end actually made it easy to keep all the handle stuff straight. You can just pull the needle out after because they're stainless. Quick wash for it so that all the other washes and paints stick and do what I want. A little silver to make things glint. Then a mucky metallic kind of wash just to unify everything. With those accessories made, now I need a base. I could build just a XPS foam base, but I want a storage container in mine. Didn't cut myself. I found if you go around a couple times with the pen, it'll make that mark really deep. I'll cut around one side and I'll flip it, and then I'll just cut the other half out from the other side. We'll draw in those iconic tack on Titan symbols, and we'll brick wall that baby, put in some gate details, and we'll just do some brickwork. And then we glue everything together. Burger. With a bottom on it, now that's a storage container. Some Mod Podge with a little bit of black paint in it, just to dye it enough so I can see where I've painted. Makes those crevices and stuff really nice and dark, so when I dry brush any colors onto it, it makes the bricks pop out nicely. I love how the insignias all kind of come to life when you just add a little color. Every figure I has one of these little bases, but I've never gone to any length to dress them up, individualize each one. I think I'm going to do it for each one now. I'll go on applying various different colors of paint to the surface, grays, some browns, back to grays again so I get a muted color. Currently you can find how to build the dolls in my playlist. I have 3 tutorials now. They're marked out tutorials. And I have one video on how to make the beads. I'm currently working on one for the 4 different type of waists I like to build. Well, with the last of my crazy glue, the lid is on. We'll do a little white dry brushing just to bring out some highlights and some character, and let's show her off. Here's a pop bottle I used. I put them over top my characters just to keep them from getting dusty. And the accessories. For me, it's all about the accessories. A pair of sword cases, a picture of her ODM gear that we're going to put off and on her belt. But she had no problem crouching on her own and standing up and staying up. Joints are all moving nice and smooth, nothing's binding. And yeah, she can stand on her own too. Here's the base all finished up. All those wonderful insignias, the house ones, the different parts. My little storage container. I have a bar in here actually. Burger. And in the top I actually have a number of different holes between the bricks. I don't have a stand for holding the girls up, but for a little extra security, if I put a bar somewhere for them to rest against, they never fall down. Now it's a good thing my girl's got some crazy movement, because you really have to bend her over to the side pretty good to get this ODM gear to go in. But it'll slide right down in those little pockets we made pretty easily. And with those slid down in, it leaves an eyelet hanging below that I'm going to be able to hang the sword scabbards off of little hooks that are made. Yeah, her side-mounted web shooters are there. Now this little hook just pops in, and they hang nicely. Originally I was going to have these little belt things, like little ropes that came to the back to help support them, but overall they hanged pretty good that I didn't need them anyways. But I'm still glad I put the eyelets in. And what sword case isn't right without swords that slide in and out? Thank you for checking out my build, and if you're interested in more of the like, hit my playlist. Hit subscribe if you want to know when anything else new comes up, and until then, let's see what else we can bring to life.